thanks again for participating. I do want to remind folks that our presenter today, Marco Alvarez, might not be your local NRCS service provider. So you'll have service providers based on the county you live in or the county your farm is located in. So at the beginning of the chat, we put in two links, one to the NRCS's website, and then also to the NRCS's Find a Service Center website link. So that second link is how you would find a service provider for your region. That doesn't mean NRCS and other counties won't answer questions if you have them, but when applying for grants or things along those lines, you work with your local provider. For folks in Sullivan County, our local provider is located in Delaware. So sometimes not every county has a service provider, and you go based off of what they recommend on the website. Yeah, so that's the intro. So Marco Alvarez is here with us today. He's an urban conservationist with the NRCS. Marco, I don't know what area you're a service provider for, so I'm not gonna assume.
Yeah, so I cover like Eastern New York, from Plattsburgh to the city, like excluding New York City. But yeah, and I work in like the urban areas, but I've worked like with a lot of other people that work in rural areas. So
Okay, cool. And Marco is gonna give us like that very grand but very basic introduction to the NRCS. There's a lot of different programs and initiatives, and especially for beginner farmers, it can be kind of hard to know where to look, what it is, or like how to even contact people. So we're hoping from this presentation today, you'll feel comfortable knowing what the NRCS is and how to take steps to make inquiries about their programs and initiatives and their funding opportunities for farmers. Um, so yeah, Marco, I'm going to give you the floor, and we are going to record this first section. So just a reminder, please keep your microphones and videos off.
thank you for all of that, the introduction. I do want to make a request before that you said that you dropped in the chat like the websites of the NRCS providers. If you can drop that again, maybe in like 10 minutes or at the end, because when people join, we don't see like the previous chat history. So I don't see that, for example. But yeah, I'll just get started. I'll start sharing my presentation here. So, as Taylor mentioned, I'm Marco Alvarez. I work with the NRCS. It's part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I'm going to talk to you about NRCS programs and specifically, I'm going to go into depth about some practices such as high tunnels, but I'm also just going to give a general overview of how to apply towards the end. So I'll talk about the mission of the NRCS, which is really just to help people, help the land. We're just providing financial and technical assistance to farmers in urban and rural areas. So people that want to start, I specifically work more with people who want to start like community gardens and people that are trying to get funds for that to educate people, have a place of gathering. But I'm going to go into high tunnels as well. And then there's a long list of programs that NRCS has that can be pretty confusing. Some of it might be too in-depth, but please feel free to ask any questions in the chat and we can answer them at the end. And no question is, don't, I'm sure if somebody has a question, then somebody else probably has the exact same question. So even for me, this stuff can be complicated and a mess. So feel free to ask. But to start, like I mentioned, that we're a voluntary agency, so we don't go and regulate anybody. We don't reach out to people to send us applications. It's just fully whoever we do outreach so that people can apply to us, of course, such as events like this. But everything is fully voluntary. So somebody wants to do a practice that's more like ecologically friendly or wants to have a high tunnel and then they hear it from farmers or they hear about us online and they reach out to us to help us to get some help with that, to get financial assistance for that. And as it says there, it incentivizes conservation practices. I'll get more into that later. I can't say how many, but hundreds of practices that we help with, stuff that helps for smaller farms, stuff that helps for larger farms, and a variety of things. And existing resource concerns have to be addressed. Basically, a resource concern is just if there's like some sort of water quality issue, if there's some sort of erosion issue is a big one. Plant productivity and health is another one. That's really what goes with when people want a high tunnel. It's just something that helps extend the season or to protect from the elements. So the main goal is to address something that's going on like ecologically in the farm that can be improved upon, and we help pay for that. There's no reporting to other agencies, there's no like regulation at all. We see the problem and we go and try to figure out a way to help that person do it. If they don't want to work with us, we just provide technical assistance. We point them to other resources. They don't have to get into a contract with the federal government because sometimes people can find that a bit taxing and it is a lot of rules and regulations to follow. But yeah, we can point to different resources like Brunel and help out in that way. So first I'm just gonna get into some high tunnels here, and I have a quick video here that can give a overview of that. So we play. I have to reshare my screen here. 1 second. And let me know if you guys can hear the video. Do you hear anything, Taylor?
Yeah, I could hear stuff.
Okay, perfect. There's the waiting music you wanted earlier.
Okay.
Across the USA, farmers are discovering the benefits of high tunnel systems. And the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service can help with both technical and financial assistance to integrate high tunnels into your farming operation. While they may look like greenhouses, high tunnels are actually quite different. Greenhouses are usually constructed of glass and metal, with seeds or plants grown in pots. High tunnels are polyethylene, plastic, or fabric-enclosed structures built over hoops, and they can be assembled for a fraction of the cost. Because of their lightweight modular construction, high tunnels are easy to assemble and often easy to move. This benefits a variety of crops, from plants to trees, growing directly in the ground or in raised beds. Having greater climate control allows farmers to improve plant health and vigor. They can protect their crops from weather extremes, poor air quality, wind, and other damaging effects. They can also grow crops earlier in the spring and later into the winter months, and sometimes year-round. And they offer farmers a greater ability to manage pests and even drift from pesticides and pollen. Because these environments prevent direct rainfall from reaching plants, farmers can use precision tools like drip irrigation to efficiently deliver both water and nutrients. High tunnels can also provide farmers with a number of ways to improve soil health, including the use of cover crops as part of their crop rotation practice. This can help prevent erosion, suppress weeds, increase soil water content, and break pest cycles. In their continuing effort to help improve the effectiveness of high tunnels, NRCS also supports scientists unlocking the secrets of cover crops, using laboratory testing to reveal even greater soil fertility benefits. But perhaps the best thing about high tunnels is that they help farmers furnish their communities with more diverse local crops, reducing energy and transportation costs and providing their communities with greater food security. To learn more about NRCS assistance with high tunnels, visit your local NRCS field office or nrcs.org.
All right, yeah. So as you heard there, they mentioned some of the other practices that we're gonna go more into later, but Yeah, that's one of our most popular programs is the high tunnel that isn't like very, it doesn't have too many strict requirements. So yeah, let's continue here. Okay, perfect. So to be able to have a high tunnel, for example, the land, it has to be croppable land where there's an area that already has crops on it. So you have to have already farmed it. The thing with NRCS to go into a more broad section is we don't like help pay for startup costs necessarily, such as like getting tractors and things like that, because we're more focused on resource concerns. So there has to be some establishment. You don't need to be a large farm or a farm that sells to the market. You can just grow for yourself and everything, but there has to be some cropping that's already going on. And it can't just be, for example, for these high tunnels, it can't just be in somebody's backyard that was already had a garden going on and they just want to have a high tunnel. That's not qualified. But continue on here. The purposes, as it mentioned in the video, extending the growing season, increasing plant vigor. It has to come from a manufacturer's kit. It's not something that you can just build yourself, but you just order it from a company that meets the NRCS specs and the maximum of 3,000 square feet. And it has to be grown in the ground, so it's not necessarily for a greenhouse, like in pots on tables. It does have to be in the ground, but it can be on raised beds up to 12 inches. And we can also help pay for raised beds that are higher than that, just not necessarily in the high tunnel. But we I've worked with people who have raised beds in their backyard and help pay for that for community gardens and things like that. And the slope of the site, it can't exceed 5%. For a lot of the practices that we have, slope is a big limiting factor. As long as that area is leveled, that's okay as well. We just don't help pay for that, and that can be costly. But sometimes farmers just have a lot of fill laying around, and it's easy for them to meet that 5% requirement with you just get a truck and fill that up. And you can't have multiple high tunnels. It has to be between 15 and 25 feet from another high tunnel or from any other structure, from any sort of house nearby, for example, any barn. The minimum height is 6 feet, but no high tunnel really goes under that for when they're in such large sizes by like 100 by 30 and 76. But yeah, so anything can be added on as well. It's just not paid for. Things like fans and ventilation. The payment is the same. The way the payment works is a flat rate. No matter, depending on the practice, it can be either it's based on the size of whatever you're doing, or it's a flat rate depending on what you're working with us on. So for a high tunnel, it's based on the square footage of the high tunnel. It's a certain amount of dollars per square foot. If it's something that's like a concentrated nutrient management plan, that's to help like regulate waste from livestock from getting into nearby water sources, for example, then that's a flat rate practice. But this just kind of shows like what we require. So we have like the snow load requirement here in New York. It'd be in every county that this applies. It has to be a Gothic structure just for that extra support, and it has to be able to support that wind as well, because a lot of these areas that we work in are on hills, and everybody talks about how they have the windiest field um, in the whole county, for example. So it has to have those 4 foot spaces between the baseboards there, between the trusses, and yeah, it has to have the bows, trusses, but not to get it. Also, when we plan a high tunnel, we usually have it with like critical area planning and mulching nearby just to help with that erosion that comes off from the high tunnel. So some maintenance that has to be done there is when there's snow. Like up here, we had a snowstorm the other day in Manzanillo County, and if there's like any erosion going on, this can help prevent that. So that's usually just any sort of seed that the farmer has. It doesn't have to be any specific requirement, just laying down some sort of cover on the sides, and mulching is just anything that a farmer has as well. Just yeah, holding that moisture there. And there is that guide to conservation plantings in the Northeast for some recommended seed that you can put down, but we're pretty flexible with that. And as long as there's 3 feet of cover all around the sides of the high tunnel, then it should be okay. Now, to get into more about the funding opportunities available through NRCS, more into the practices, into the program side of things, stepping away a little bit from the specificity of the high tunnels, but getting more into what else can be done with us. So, like I said, provide financial assistance for certain things, like listed there. Cover crops is another big one. Ag waste systems. So that's yeah. There's some requirements for the cover crops based on when you have to put the seed down, and the payment also is based on the acreage of cover crops that you use. You can get higher payments if you use multiple species of cover crops, and yeah. So all of this requires a contract with the NRCS. So a lot of people call it grants for subsidies, and it's not a loan when you work with us. There's a sister agency in the U.S. Department of Agriculture that's called the Farm Services Agency, and they do focus more on loans. They also have grants and programs like us as well, but there's more microloans and different loans for sort of more like there's more insurance, crop insurance sort of things, and they help establish everything to work with NRCS. But for us, it's more of a government contract, and there is no paying back any of the money that's given. It is like a grant subsidy, but it is a contract. You have to meet all of the different requirements that we have based on the standard and specs. It has to be done by a certain time, and the farmer themselves has to figure out if it's a larger project, something that's a manure storage, for example, or for a pit, then you have to find the contractor yourself. We can sort of help give recommendations, or who other not recommendations, but we can give ideas from and say who other farmers have used, but the contracting is up to the farmer. That's separate from us, and the payment helps cover the cost to find the contractor. And funds are reimbursed, so these aren't distributed at the beginning of the contract. Everything has to be completed for us to be able to send those funds out. Now, I know that here we're focused, a lot of the people here are beginning farmers. So the good news is that for beginning farmers, there is an advance payment option available that you can get 50% of the cost before installing a practice. And then once everything is certified and complete, if everything meets all the specs, you can get the other 50% reimbursed. And you see this is blocking here. Yeah, there's no set percentage cost share. For example, another state agency that might be useful for everybody to know is the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. They also give funding to farmers for different practices, sometimes mostly focused on conservation as well. But theirs is more based on a percentage cost share. So then they have to show, the farmer shows receipts for what they paid. So they might say, we'll pay for 70% of the cost, we'll pay for 90, we'll pay for 50. For us, it's more on that per unit basis that I mentioned earlier, based on the square footage of a high tunnel, based on the acreage of the cover crops that are put down, based on the amount of fencing that was put down, based on the amount of pipeline that was put down in square feet in feet. So there's a difference there between the federal agency on our side and the state agency, Soil and Water Conservation District, which we usually work hand in hand. So if you reach out to us and reach out to the state, oftentimes what we don't cover, the state can come in and help cover the rest of that. And it's all a competitive process, of course. There's no guarantee for any of this, but we do work hand in hand. And the other agency that I mentioned, Farm Services Agency, is the sister agency within us, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We work together a lot too to try to make sure that everybody can have the funding that they need. And just to show some of the practices here, we have the big ones. A lot of the most common ones here would be like underground outlet, tree shrub, and pruning. So I know everything has been focused on ag, and this is likely everybody here is a more beginning farmers, but we do also work a lot with forestry just to like remove invasive species since we're focused on conservation. Just yeah, either different pruning activities, different things to improve like the timber stand management, and just wildlife habitat management for people who want their forests more for hunting, want to increase the amount of deer so that they can hunt, things like that. But yeah, some other big practices here that are common, like stream crossing. People have livestock. We can help pay for like geotextile to be put down, gravel to be put down, and have an area for the livestock to be able to cross. And we're starting to work with silver pasture as well for people that are interested in that. It's still, I think in New York State, we haven't exactly started funding with that, but we're starting to get on board, and in other states have started to do that with NRCS. But yeah, feel free to ask about any of the practices here, about any other practices that we might have. This, as you can see, is just from STU, and there's like 30 or so there, 20. So you can imagine the hundreds of different things that you can help with. Now, we also have special rate payments. And as I mentioned earlier, thank you for everybody here is beginning farmer. That just means that you've not operated a farm for longer than 10 years. And that can carry on at a different property. If you were a farmer in another property under a different business name, for example, for 15 years, but then you move somewhere else and you start farming somewhere else, and that new land under a new entity, then like a new LLC or a new Inc. that you have, you can still qualify as a beginning farmer for the projects on that land. And for limited resource farmers, that's if the farm revenue is under the household income, the median poverty level for the county. I'm not exactly sure where it would be for Sullivan County, and I'm not sure where everybody's located, but I know for Rensselaer County, I think it's in around the mid 30s to high 30s or 37,000 or so for that. But yeah, and then the socially disadvantaged. So that's if you're a part of a historically underrepresented group to USDA programs, because in the past, people couldn't get funding based on the skin color, based on other things. So the socially disadvantaged group includes Asians, Black, Hispanic, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans. And yeah, so the special rate payment, to go over that for beginning farmers and for anybody here in this group, veteran farmers as well, is that you do get a slightly higher, or depending on the acreage, might be more than slightly higher payment rate for the practices. So if for high tunnels, for example, you might get a little over $1 more per square foot, which can be a couple thousand when you're talking 2,500 square foot. So yeah, it can be around 2 to 3,000 more. It depends on the practice, how much more it can be. It's just, yeah, again, based on that per unit basis. And the veteran farmer is if you're U.S. military within 10 years of discharge. And as it says there, if you've not operated a farm for longer than 10 years, regardless of when that discharge was. So to get into more of the programs in New York that these would be under, again, if you go into a USDA service office and talk to somebody there, they'll know which program to sign you up for. But EQIP is our largest program, and it addresses the resource concerns on farmsteads, so just the area around the barn, cropland, pasture, and forest. A lot of our practices have to do with pasture as well. So if anybody is interested in getting livestock, you can get help for prescribed grazing, for different seed options that you want for the grass that the cows are going to graze on, and for forest, as I touched on earlier. And this is what we have the most funding for. So this is likely where the funding would come from for any of you all for any other practices that you're interested in, just because that's the way the Farm Bill has been written. Most of our funding goes into this program. The Agriculture Management Assistance Program is more what I work in. And so here we have a map of the New York urban agricultural areas. And a lot of these areas, as you can see, it might not seem like it's urban, but based on what USDA says is urban, it tries to not, they haven't fully defined it because we want to be as inclusive as possible in that definition. It's not just going to be New York City. So there's all these areas where the populations might not be so large, but if there's a town there and the main, there's even residential areas can qualify. So like I said, I work a lot with people who just have a large backyard and they want a high tunnel there, and it's in the middle of it. It can be in the middle of a neighborhood, but it can just seem like something that's also not very urban. And yeah, so that just means that you would help qualify for, that you can qualify for this program. Gives you another option to get funding from if you don't get funded under EQIP and you're in this urban area. You can get your chances increase of getting funded. And again, whoever you're talking to at your local USDA office, they can reach out to me, or they'll know if you qualify for this based on the different programs the different software that we use to determine the urban areas based on that, on what the USDA says it is. Conservation Stewardship Program. This program is usually for people who already have done practices with us through EQIP, but it's open to everybody. And it's helping people who are already being good stewards to the land, who are already doing some sort of conservation on the land, and they just have to do some sort of enhancement to that. For example, if you're already cover cropping and you say, oh, I didn't know I could have gotten paid for cover cropping through EQIP, well, you can still possibly qualify for CSP. And the enhancement would be to have a multi-species cover crop option. So you can add more crops in that rotation to maybe add more clover or something for nitrogen fixing on the soil. But yeah, there's also stuff for funding for pollinators, for grazing. Somebody that is already doing prescribed grazing, if they start keeping track of it, for example, and limiting the amount of days or specifically recording the amount of days that they're in certain paddocks, that they can help get some funding for that as well. And for pollinators. So through this program, some people who just want pollinator gardens near their barn, near their house, in their front yard, they can get funding for that as well. Usually we work through we recommend like the different seed mixes for that, and yeah. This is kind of a newer program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. These are it's EQIP, but it's CIC, Conservation Incentive Contracts. And it's similar to CSP in that there's annual payments. So for EQIP, you get paid when the practice is done. For CSP, you get an annual payment once you complete the practice, but it can be, for example, for the records management for prescribed grazing, that's something that you just are constantly doing, and you get paid for that at the end of the year. And there's our 5-year contracts. While EQIP can be 1 year or 2 years, it can be more years than that if you have a list of practices. But CSP contracts are always 5, and you can get renewed at the end of the 5 for different enhancements for that. And this just sort of helps people, this program specifically sort of helps people transition into that CSP program by paying for things like reduced tillage and no-till and nutrient management, cover crops. Yeah. Now, to finish up here, the last couple of slides. So let's talk about the different program eligibilities. You contact your local USDA service center, and as was mentioned earlier, that would be in Delaware County if you're located in Sullivan County. So you want to contact your local NRCS staff. establish records with the USDA by working with Farm Services Agency. That's the sister agency that I mentioned. And by establishing records, they're going to ask you for either the entity with the tax number, social security number, if you don't have an entity yet, like some sort of business. And they're going to ask you for the deed of the land. They're going to ask for maps and to delineate, show where your fields are. And yeah, the farm has to be in operation and producing, like I said, but keep in mind that that can be a pretty flexible definition because people with a backyard and just a garden in their backyard can qualify as a farm. They still get that farm number. They still get a track number once they work with Farm Services Agency. Is you get established with the farm and tract, and then you are able to qualify for our programs. And you also have to meet these wetland requirements. There's a Food Security Act in 1985 that says that land can't be converted from wetland into farmland. You can't qualify for USDA funding if you converted or on that property if it was converted before you bought that property, a wetland from before 1985, from after 1985 to a cropland. That's because we don't want to make a land use more intensive. That's sort of like a wetland protection act, and we're not trying to intensify the land use on that. So yeah, that would be done through us. We would determine if there's a wetland on there. We have like somebody come out, a soil scientist possibly, or we just check the software online to see if there's hydric soils present, if there's any like wetland soils present on the site. And if there isn't, then the person's usually cleared. If there is, there usually has to be an on-site visit. And we look at the different pictures. We have decades of pictures of different properties around New York State. So yeah, that's another requirement for us. And that's not, again, we wouldn't report that to anybody. That just means you wouldn't qualify for USDA funding. And yeah, so I think this mentions a little bit of that here. Mention some of the paperwork that you need. And there's also the AGI limit of 900,000, which I don't think anybody we've worked with really has that issue, but the adjusted gross income of the farm cannot be more than $900,000 per year. And there's that Food Security Act that I was mentioning earlier. It has to be in wetland compliance and highly erodible land, just based on the soil. If it is highly erodible land, we just have a conservation plan and work with you to make sure that we're not going to worsen and try to increase the erosion on that land. And there must be an identified eligible resource concern, as I mentioned in the beginning, something like water quality, something like plant productivity and health, something like high amounts of soil erosion, gullies, things like that. And yeah, all of those different land uses qualify: forest lands, croplands, pasture lands, and farmstead. Farmstead, we usually do the concentrated nutrient management plan where people keep their livestock. And pasture land is like different ones I mentioned earlier with rotational and prescribed grazing. But yeah, so now the last slide here, I think we have as I mentioned earlier, these programs are competitive. This isn't just that you apply, you get it. There's an application process. It's on accepted year round, but the cutoff period is usually in the end of summer or fall, usually around November. And if you apply after November, that just means you'd go into the next year of funding. There's no issue there. But the process does take some time. If you apply in before November, then you'd probably be notified around May or June next year. So make sure it's something that you're planning on having done many months out in advance to a year out in advance. And if it's a larger project, it can be multiple years. If you want something like a well built or a waste storage system. And then so we rank the applications based on the resource concerns, the amount of conservation benefits that by practice, we just mean something like high tunnel, something like cover crops, something like prescribed grazing. It's ranked based off of that, based on the slope of the land. And eligible conservation practices are those that have not been done on the land. So we're not gonna pay for multiple things usually for that are already being addressed. But for example, you can't apply for high tunnels, multiple high tunnels in 1 year, or you can apply for high tunnels throughout multiple years. The ranking might not be as high, or points might not be as high if you've applied for multiple high tunnels, but we've worked with many people that have applied in different years and have gotten it. It just depends on the funding of the year, based on the new farm bill that's going to come out. So it's a lot of factors at play. But yeah, to get started, contact your local USDA service center. Taylor will drop that in the chat as well for Sullivan County. And if she hasn't already, I haven't checked the chat. Sorry for that. But that's pretty much everything I have. And thank you everybody for your time. Please feel free to ask any questions at all. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to refer you to somebody that can help if I can't. But thanks again.